It all started with a notice, a bright, fluorescent orange paper slapped on my door, telling me I'd violate HOA rules by having holiday lights that didn't quite meet the community standards. Now, these weren't extravagant lights. They were just 3 little LED snowflakes I had bought on sale at Walmart. But to Karen, the president of our HOA, that was the hill she chose to die on. At first, I shrugged it off. I mean, it was ridiculous, right? How could such a small thing set her off? But the next week, the doorbell rang again, and another letter was shoved in my mailbox. This time, it was a $75 fine for excessive mailbox decoration. I had a modest wreath on it, for crying out loud. Not exactly Times Square level decor, but Karen had already decided I was her target. Then things started to get weirder. I noticed her car, this ugly, beat-up white SUV with HOA authority, stenciled on the side, just circling my house. She'd sit there for hours, sometimes parked directly in front of my lawn with a clipboard in hand. I was starting to get the sense that this wasn't just about rules anymore. This was personal. It didn't take long for the other neighbors to chime in. She always picks a new target every year. One of them, Mr. Peterson, warned me. If you don't back down, she's gonna make your life hell. That was when I started to realize something wasn't right. It wasn't about the lights or the wreath. It was about her power, and she was going to do everything in her authority to make sure I knew she was in charge. Then came the third notice, a so-called grass height violation. Now, let me tell you, my lawn had been professionally trimmed just days before. But to Karen, it didn't matter. Her patrol car showed up, and she walked around like she was inspecting a crime scene, measuring every inch. It was getting out of hand, and it wasn't just me, everyone was afraid of her. At the next HOA meeting, Karen sat at the head of the table, all smug, rattling off my supposed infractions. The moment I asked to see the official guidelines, she sneered, "The guidelines are interpreted by the board, namely me." And you could feel the room tense up. People shifted uncomfortably. Even the board members were looking down at their shoes. But Karen wasn't done. She started showing up at my house at all hours of the day, clipboard in hand, making notes about everything from the angle of my trash bins to the color of my mulch. She even called the police when my recycling bin was out the night before pickup, something that every other house did without a second glance. But somehow, to her, it was another violation. I started hearing rumors from the neighbors, rumors that made no sense, like how Karen was telling people I was planning to rent my house out to college students. Ridiculous, right? But by then, it had already started. People who I had waved to for months suddenly started giving me strange looks. It wasn't just about the rules anymore. It was about isolating me, making sure I was the outsider. Then, one night, I came home to find my mailbox bent at a 45-degree angle. Somebody had clearly smashed it. Tire tracks marked the grass, and when I posted about it on the HOA's online forum, Karen's response was a snarky comment about how, per HOA policy, mailbox maintenance was my responsibility. No concern, no apology, just a reminder that I was to blame for everything. That was when I decided to take action. I reached out to the HOA's listed attorney, and guess what? The email bounced. There was no such attorney. I called the county offices, and that's when I discovered something huge. The HOA's registration was outdated, and the legal notices Karen had been sending me weren't even legally binding. But that didn't stop her. Oh no, Karen wasn't about to give up that easily. She sent her little beautification committee to inspect my property every other day, scribbling notes in their little notebooks. I overheard one of them say, "She's not going to last long. Karen gets what she wants." It was almost laughable, except it wasn't. But then, everything changed. I did some digging. I started looking at property records, searching for any clue that could help me fight back. And there it was, the bombshell. Karen didn't even own her house. The real owner was none other than my lawyer. Jonathan A. Mercer, lawyer, owned Karen's house. She was renting it. Not only that, but she was behind on her rent payments. The woman who had been harassing me for months was a tenant, barely hanging on to her position as the so-called queen of the neighborhood. I called Jonathan right away. He wasn't surprised. Apparently, he had been dealing with Karen's behavior for years, even before I'd moved in. He'd been trying to evict her from that property, but Karen had a lease-to-own agreement, and she wasn't exactly keeping up her end of the bargain. Jonathan agreed to help me, and within 2 days, he'd gathered everything we needed. Karen's behavior wasn't just Rudy, it was a violation of her lease. So, we came up with a plan. Jonathan drafted a formal Evict notice citing her lease violations and her misuse of HOA authority. We scheduled it to be delivered at the next HOA meeting, right in front of her fan club. And that's when it got fun. At the meeting, Karen stood there, smug as ever, prattling on about how I was the one destroying the neighborhood. And then, the door swung open. The room fell silent as a process server stepped in and handed her a thick envelope. Sir VYC of legal notice, the man said, voice cool and professional. Karen's face went pale as she ripped open the envelope. She started reading the Evict notice, her hands shaking. She tried to play it off, but the room could feel the shift. The gasps echoed. The tables had turned. Karen tried to defend herself, pulling out obscure bylaws and trying to act like she was still in control. But nobody was buying it anymore. I raised my hand, calmly pointing out that the HOA could fine us, but they didn't have the authority to evict anyone. Karen's face twisted in anger, but she couldn't deny it. The people in the room were starting to doubt her. Days went by, and Karen became more desperate. She called a special HOA meeting mandatory attendance, of course, and tried to rally her supporters. She presented a slideshow showing pictures of my house, complete with red arrows pointing to minor imperfections, and labeled them as violations. But the crowd was no longer with her. Whispers spread through the room, and people began to turn against her. Then came the final blow. A few days after the meeting, the HOA board gathered the signatures needed for a vote of no confidence. We were done with her. People had seen enough. And with that, Karen's reign of terror came to an end. But that wasn't the last time Karen made headlines. In the weeks that followed, it became clear she hadn't learned her lesson. She tried to manipulate the HOA funds, taking nearly $12,000 out of the account for fake community improvement projects. Of course, we found out. And within weeks, the police were at her door, investigating her for embezzlement. Karen's downfall was swift. She was evicted not just from the HOA, but from her position as the so-called queen of the neighborhood. The new board took charge, implementing a new motto: respect your neighbor, but live your life. Block parties came back. People put up their lawn ornaments without fear of fines, and the neighborhood started to breathe again. And then, as if the universe wasn't done with her, Karen tried to find a new job in community management. She ended up as an assistant manager at a rundown apartment complex. But it wasn't long before the tenants there saw through her. Complaints started flooding in. She was fired in under 3 months. It was as if Karen had become a walking cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when power is abused. She became a joke, a reminder of how far someone could go when they let their bitterness and desire for control consume them. The HOA? Well, it was a new place now, one where neighbors didn't have to live in fear of petty rules and fines. We had learned, together, what it meant to stand up for each other. And that, my friends, is the story of how a small, tight-knit community fought back against tyranny. So, what do you think? Was Karen's downfall inevitable? Or could she have changed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it.